Hi, it's Helen Tarrant. Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. You're here with Helen Tarrant. Today I'm going to cover off the cost of selling a commercial property. So if you're the vendor and you're selling the commercial property, or you've had a commercial property for a while and you're about to sell the property, what are the costs associated with it? And when is the best time to sell? But also on top of that, I want to cover off what happens when you actually sell the property from the purchaser's point of view. So if you were buying the property and the seller is selling you the property, what happens at the takeover stage when you've actually sold the property, and also when you're taking over the property as a new income purchaser. So when you are an owner of a commercial property, you typically have a property that is leased, or if you were an occupier, you've occupied the property for a while, and then when you're about to sell it, you might sell it to an owner occupier, or you might sell it with a lease to another investor. Now, if you're selling the property as an owner occupier to another owner occupier, it's pretty much very straightforward. It's whatever the price is, rate per square meter, you come to a negotiation and you sell that. So pretty market rate, market acceptance, that's it. So in a bit of a stress state, you might sell it for cheaper. In a growing market, you can sell it for more. So that's really very straightforward. Now, if you had a commercial property and you had a tenant in there, and say they're on a 3 or 5 year lease, what is the appropriate time to sell the property? Now, that can be very confusing because you actually want to get the maximum price, but you're not sure if this is the right time to let it go. Well, it's less to do with market, but more to do with the tenant itself. So if you preferably have a tenant that's already had one term in the property, so they're not a new tenant, but they're one term in the property. So they've spent, let's say, maybe 2 or 3 years already in the property. They're pretty established. They've done some refurbishment of the property, or you've helped them with rental incentives to fit out the premise, and they've renewed and taken up the actual option. So they're actually on their second option, or maybe a second lease if you bought in halfway through and you renegotiated a lease. The best time to sell is actually when you have about 18 months left on the lease. Look, it is a short lease and people are going to comment on it, but if you have 18 months, or preferably if you could even get 2 years on the lease, that is actually a good time to sell, because it's not short enough so that they can't get a loan. It's not too long where you haven't had the benefit yourself as the owner of it to reap the benefits of the positive cash flow and the growth. And it's also in a state where it gives the incoming purchaser some security, and it gives them some history so they can look at, in preparation if they need to re-tenant in the future, or start that conversation early with the tenant in 12 months time. So it gives everybody a bit of space, a bit of room. So that's why at about that 18-month, 2 years period, if you have that on the lease, it is the best time to sell. So regardless of what the market is doing, having that is actually puts you in a sought after position. Of course, you can sell a property with a brand new lease of 3 years, brand new lease of 5 years, and that's the optimal. You're going to get the top price for that. But let's just say you need to liquidate some stock, and that you need to just sell something in your property to invest in something else, then that is actually a good option for you, is to look at a property that you have in your portfolio that has 18 or 2 years left. The tenant has done some refurbishments, and that the tenant is quite settled in the property. So the incoming purchaser is seeing it, some security, they can get a loan and they can negotiate with the tenant. So that in hand and that in mind, that is the prime time you should be selling if you can't sell with a brand new lease. So as a seller, so as a landlord selling, vendor selling, what are some of your costs? Firstly, there's marketing costs. So there could be $3,000 to $5,000 or $6,000 of marketing costs. So advertising, as in you might have a signage outside your building. You're going to need to engage an agent, which of course you pay them a commission, but just in terms of marketing on the real commercial real estate, on the agent's website, as well as 3 or 4 other commercial property websites, you're going to need about about anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 to $6,000, depending on the size of your property. Obviously, the larger the property, the more you're going to spend on marketing. So That is the first upfront cost. The second upfront cost you're going to have is you're going to need to maybe make the property look a little bit better. It's not like residential where you have to make it really pleasing, but let's say you have a freestanding building. Now, there's not much to do if you've got a strata, but if you have a freestanding building and the tenant's meant to take care of it, but let's say the grass is not mowed, things are looking like, the building could have been cleaned a little bit, the area could have been tidied up, you might want to spend some time to make sure, the lighting on it outside works, that you might want to gurney the concrete, and you might want to tidy up and mow the lawn so that everything looks really nice and neat, so that you can get some professional photos done and get it ready for market. So there may be some costs around that. And then finally, you've got your solicitor's costs and your agent's commission. So your solicitor's costs can be anywhere from, a flat rate of say $2,000 for the transaction to anywhere from to $5,000 or $6,000, depending on who you engage. And of course, agent's fees. So agent's fees can go anywhere from 2% plus GST to 3%, or maybe even, depending on the size of the property, 3.5% plus GST. So if you are selling a $1 million, $2 million property, probably sits somewhere around that 2% plus GST mark. Now, that is pretty much encompass your cost. So if you add that in, say on $1 million property, you've got a, say 2% cost, which is $20,000 plus GST, so $22,000, plus some advertising, maybe let's call it $5,000, you're about $27,000, plus maybe some tidying up and miscellaneous costs like solicitor's costs, you're about $30,000 to $32,000 is the cost of you selling that property. So about 3.5% is what you're budgeting for. Of course, after that, we've got, all the tax stuff that you have to pay, and that is really something for you to work out with your accountant. Now, if you were a purchaser and you're looking to buy that same property, that $1 million property, what are some of your costs? Well, if you were buying it, then you'll have solicitor's costs as well, which can go anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 or more, depending on the size of the property. You would want to do your due diligence, which may be a pest and building report, maybe a strata report. You might need to get a roof quote. You might need to do a site inspection. You might go and do more invasive pest reports if something comes up. You might want to test for asbestos. All of these things might come up. So that cost may cost you anywhere from, say, $1,000 for a pest and building to maybe $3,000 if you want to do some specialist reports as well. On top of that, you've got valuation fees, which could be, say, $1,500 or $2,000, some bank fees as well for the loan, as well as obviously you've got some stamp duty later on, which could be somewhere around that 4% of your purchase price as well. So the total cost for you as a purchaser of $1 million property are, firstly, your solicitor's costs. Let's say, let's put that in at $2,000. Secondly, your pest and building at $1,000, so we're at $3,000. Let's look at valuations at $2,000, so we're at $5,000 already. And let's say you're doing some miscellaneous, more reports or miscellaneous costs. Let's add another $2,000, so that's $7,000. 4% of the 1 million, it's about 40,000. So we're at about 47,000 at the moment. And then you may have some bank fees, which might be half of 1% of the loan, which could be a few $1,000s, $3,000 or $5,000. So you're probably sitting, the cost of you buying that property is probably around that 5 to 6% mark. So it is not a cheap acquisition cost, but remember, commercial property is for longevity. You don't want to be holding it today and selling it tomorrow. So that cost gets eroded over time. So for example, stamp duty is deductible against future capital gains, and all of your other expenses are also tax deductible as well. So those are really essentially the costs if you were purchasing that same $1 million property. So what happens at settlement when you've got the vendor and yourself as the purchaser coming together? What actually happens then? Does the lease get transferred? What are some of the actual things that happen? Well, firstly, the lease goes with the property and it comes part and parcel as the tenanted property. And when your bank assesses that, that's what they're assessing and lending you against, apart from other things they're considering. But that gets transferred to you automatically. That's an automatic transfer on settlement. So you don't actually need a transfer or assignment document, as they call it, where they assign the original lease to you as incoming purchaser. It's an automatic right. Sometimes your solicitors will insist, or the vendor solicitor will insist that happens, So if that's the case, then absolutely there's additional paperwork, additional cost to get that assigned, but that's not necessary and you don't need to do it. All of the rights within the lease gets transferred automatically to you as the incoming purchaser. And then what you get as settlement from the vendor solicitor is this letter called a letter of atonement. So the letter of atonement basically is served on the tenant by either yourself, if you're self-managing, or the managing agent, and it basically instructs the tenant to now pay you rent because the property is sold and you have replaced the vendor now in his position to collect rent from them. So once you get that and that's served, your tenant automatically starts paying you rent, and all of the rights that's conveyed to you as the landlord under the original lease is now to you. So the tenant has an obligation to you, you have an obligation to them, even though your name is not on the lease. And of course, in the future, you may amend that and you may get a new lease when it comes up for option. So that's what happens in the physical world in practice when you are buying a property. But those costs still stands regardless of whether you're selling $1 million property or $2 million or a $500,000 property. You still need to pay stamp duty, you still need to pay legal costs, you still need to pay agent's commission if you're selling. So just think about that in terms of when you sell and work out if that's really worth it or not. Because remember, it's a long game, and just because you're having some issues with your commercial property right now doesn't mean it always will be. Once it's ironed out, it's going to turn out to be a great property. But if you need a hand and you want me to help you assess your commercial property, or you just want to find one and you want me to help you find it, reach out to me at helentarrant.com or email me at helen@commercialpropertycashflow. In the meantime, click subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.